Welcome to Lesson 2, Finance. Our objectives today are to understand some key terms that are associated with loans, monthly payments, and finance charges given a table. Here's a diagram below of America's debt. And if you'll notice, for quite some time, we didn't have very much debt. It was very low. And then if you'll notice, we have an exponential growth in the amount of debt that we have in America. So you can imagine what the finance charges would be, because as our debt increases, so too do our interest or finance charges. Okay, let's look at how loans work. When you get a loan, typically you're issued a promissory note. And a promissory note is just a promise to pay. It's legal and binding. And usually the promissory note will state how much you want to borrow and what the finance charges will be for you when you're paying back your promissory note. You have to sign and date it in order to make it a legally binding document. So what happens if you sign your promissory note? Well, what ends up happening is you get money. So this is how you get a loan. The amount of money that you receive is called the principal. It's very similar to savings, and we've talked a lot about savings. When you invest money into your savings account, you invest is called principal. So the amount you receive from a bank or a credit or another lending institution is called the principal. Well, great. So now you have this principal. How do you pay it back? When you pay it back, you have to pay back the principal usually over a period of time, and that period of time is usually stated in your promissory note. It could be anywhere from 6 months to 30 years, depending upon what it is. But you'll pay back the principal that you borrowed. Unfortunately, it's usually not that simple. You have to pay a fee to borrow money from somebody. And remember, we talked about the cost, a cost of money over time, or the time value of money. Over time, $1 today is going to buy a lot less tomorrow. So somebody's not going to lend you money for free. So what you end up paying back is interest, and that's called your finance charge. And it's usually at a given rate. So it costs you money to borrow money. Ultimately, things that you purchase given a loan, so in this example, maybe you got a $10 loan, end up costing you a lot more depending upon your interest rate and how long it takes you to pay it back. Something to keep in mind. Let's try some examples now with finance charges and loans, looking at a table. Here's a table of monthly payments per $1,000 of principal. So you have to keep in mind that these monthly payments relate to $1,000 of principal. So if you borrowed $2,000, then each of these would have to be multiplied by 2. Let's look at the way this table works. Along the left side here, we have our interest rate, the rate at which we borrow the money from the bank or the credit union. And that's our APR, our annual percentage rate. Along the top here, we have our time. So how long are we borrowing the money for? 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years. Okay, so here's a simple table. Easy to figure out. You don't have to do a lot of calculations. Let's actually go ahead and try an example using our table. So here's example 1. What is the monthly payment for a $4,000 2-year loan with an APR of 8.5%? Notice we have it highlighted here. We would go to a 2-year column at 8.5%, and we would come up with an amount per $1,000. So how do we figure this out? Well, what we need to do first is find it in the table. We know that the table lists monthly cost per 1,000, and we have located it with our red arrow. Then we want to divide the amount that you want to borrow by 1,000, and that's because remember that this table shows amounts in $1,000 increments. Well, we want to borrow 4,000, so we're going to need 4 increments. The monthly cost per $1,000 borrowed is going to be $45.46. As we just stated, we're borrowing 4 sets of 1,000, so we need to multiply that amount by 4. $45.46 times 4 gives us $181.84. And that will end up being our monthly payment if we borrow $4,000 at 8.5% interest. Let's take this example a little bit further. So now we know our monthly payment. It's $181.84. Let's go to part 2. In example 2, what is the total amount of the monthly payments for a $4,000 two-year loan with an APR of 8.5%? Well, we know what our individual payment is. We just figured that out, $181.84. So we can write that down so we keep track of it. So we have $181.84 that we know that we need to pay back each month from our table. So the total amount of the monthly payments, here's our solution. There are 12 months in a year, so the borrower is going to make a total of 24 monthly payments, 12 times 2. So we know we're going to pay 24 of these. We're going to multiply by 24 to get $4,364.16. That's going to be the total of what we have to pay back. So we know what our monthly payment is. We know what the total is of what we have to pay back. Let's go ahead and go to our third example here of finance charges. What is the finance charge then for a $4,000 two-year loan with an APR of 8.5%? That's easy to figure out once we know our monthly payments, once we know what we had to pay. We'll take the total amount of our monthly payments from the prior example, and we'll just subtract what we borrowed. We only borrowed $4,000 if you remember, but we had to pay back $4,364.16. That means we paid interest charges or finance charges of $364.16. That's what it cost us to borrow $4,000 over 2 years. So you have to ultimately decide if that cost is worth it, if what you're wanting to buy is important enough to justify paying an extra $364.16. And that concludes our lesson 2 for today, finance charges and loans. Hopefully now you understand some key terms associated with loans, and you'll be able to look at a table to determine monthly payments, total payments, and the finance charges.